Hello and welcome again to another episode of the IdeaCast. My name is Thomas Wittig and our topic today is Remarketing Dynamics, how to get the most out of your marketing campaign budget. What I'd like to cover today with you are several topics. First of all, I want to get started and get everybody grounded. What do we mean by remarketing dynamics? And then how does it impact and apply to your campaign? We will talk about some key strategies and tactics, and more importantly, some fundamental aspects you should consider. And then I want to walk you through a short case study to show how a campaign optimization can lead to much better results. In other words, how can you win more customers faster with a higher profitability of your campaign? But let's go a step back and revisit the fundamentals about building an audience. So when you hear the terms about remarketing and retargeting, they're pretty much synonyms, so they are used for the same topic. And you also encounter things like RLSA. The acronym stands for Remarketing Lists for Search Ads. And one note of caution, do not confuse the remarketing dynamics, what we're talking about here today, with dynamic remarketing, which is yet another topic that we can explore later on. So what is remarketing and how does it work? Just a basic recap about the fundamentals of remarketing. So let's say you have a certain number of searches for a given product, and people start clicking on the searches or the advertisement that they see, and they become visitors of your landing page. Let's call it landing page A. And eventually a portion of those visitors will convert and buy your product. But the much larger portion usually are leaving the website, so they are considered as non-converters. Now, when you are started to build a remarketing audience, what happens when people start visiting your website? They may or may not accept a cookie. And if they do accept a cookie, you can add them to a remarketing audience. So that is a list which you can use later on to retarget customers again. For example, those customers who have visited your website and have not converted. So you can entice them to come back to your website to revisit. And you could, for example, lead them to the same or a different landing page. That's another topic about the design of landing pages. But the point here is that you have a chance again to reach out to those customers and convert them into customers. So from potential customers or visitors to actually paying customers. What are the benefits and the key challenges? There's much to say about remarketing, but what you can often read and see, and also see in your own analytics, is that remarketing tend to have a higher click-through rate, lower cost, and a higher conversion rate. And if a remarketing campaign is done very well, you can actually boost your campaign with remarketing ads. For example, you could win customers to come to your website, and even if they don't buy at the first place, but they have, for example, put items in the shopping cart on your website, then you can reach out to those customers later on and show them a different landing page, for example. And that usually has a very profound impact on campaign performance. The little bit challenging news here is that a remarketing list usually has a given retention period, which you can choose, but in a given let's say range. Usually it's somewhere between 30 days and 180 days. On some platforms, it even goes up to 540 days. Now, that doesn't mean that a longer retention means that the marketing list is then more effective. Because you have to consider, for example, that the customer's preferences change over time, which could be driven, for example, by demographics and demographic change. So the audience that you are marketing today, in a few months or years down the road, they might have very different preference profiles. So they might choose different products or price points for the same products or premium versions, etc. So keep that in mind. So the longer retention period is not always better. And likewise, a much too short retention period could also be very problematic, because you might lose out on some important business. So the implications for your campaign, when we talk about remarketing audience change, and again, keep in mind that dynamics is always about change over time. We have to consider the following things. So let's say, for example, I did a short simulation here. Let's say, for example, you ran 3 campaigns. And these are short campaigns running for, let's say, 5 days. And you're adding on each one of these campaigns 100 customers per day for a period of 5 days, for example. So that means that once you start the first campaign, you have started the first retention period signal. In other words, those customers that you have added in this first peak here that we see on this chart, after the retention period is over, these first customers must roll off the audience list. So that's something to keep in mind. And then, of course, with the time delay, all the others will roll off the list as well. So what it actually means is it will result in a pattern like this. It looks a little bit like a pyramid or Maya pyramid. So you have added the first customers, then the second wave, the third wave, and then you're still holding these customers for some period of time. And once the retention period of these first customer cohorts starts here, you are basically reducing the list of the remarketing audience. That's something to keep in mind. In other words, what goes into the list with the time profile and the orders of magnitude over time must disappear after some retention time. So the audience accumulates and depletes over time. And that's why you get these interesting patterns when you look at your audience reports and you're wondering, well, what just happened here? Because I added a lot of customers, but they're not available anymore. So for example, I just took an arbitrary example from a marketing campaign. So here, marketing campaign was carried out and it added a tremendous amount of customers to a remarketing list, an audience list. So after a short retention period, or until this retention period, until the campaign ran, we added customers to the audience list. But once the expiring flag was set and started, then the customers are rolling off. So you can see that. And I took this because it is almost a little bit similar like this pyramid shaped figures that we saw before. But since you will see a fluctuation in the amount of customers that you're adding on a day-by-day basis, it's not always like a pyramid or a triangle or so. It can be very different. And also keep in mind the sources of customers. So for example, the inflows of customers into your audience list can come from different sources. It can come from direct access, from organic growth, organic search, from PPC advertising, and so on. So a couple of things to consider here when we talk about remarketing performance. One thing is very obvious. When you start, let's say you have a remarketing list and you would start your next campaign pretty much late in the game when the audience list is winding down already, you're getting in a danger zone, because then you will have little customers to work with from that campaign. So it's important to know what is the shape of your remarketing audience over time. And that is an important consideration. The second key topic here is that we have an audience, but that is not necessarily the addressable audience. Why? Because we are selling products or services to that or to the same audience. And in a, let's say, a smarter way of doing remarketing, you would not advertise to those customers who have bought your product already. So make sure that you exclude those customers who bought your product already from your campaign. And that's why you see this difference in the audience size. So this is the absolute size of the audience minus those that have converted over time. You will get a shape like this. So it's also something to consider. And that doesn't make it easier, of course, because you have to do some forecasting and estimates, because at this point in time, there's no such a capability in the remarketing list. So you have to make let's say some kind of a mental model, an idea about how your remarketing list will change over time for let's say the next weeks or month for the time that you're running the campaign. Now, somewhat of a good news is that you can use also some tactics to retain customers in the audience, because once people start visiting your website again, the flag of the let's say the retention clock is reset. So let's say a customer is coming in after on day 0 and then coming back on day 30, then the retention period is starting again on day 30. So, and let's say you have 100 days retention period. So then after day 30 plus 100, so on day 130, the customer would roll off the list again. So that means that we have to be mindful about how we nurture our list. So that is a key tactic, and keep that in mind that, for example, if you have an interesting list that you want to retain, you should always make sure that customers are revisiting your website. You could use, for example, a blog or other interesting content to make sure that customers are revisiting and the retention clock is continued there. Now I would like to walk you through a short case study. And the question is, how does remarketing performance scenario play out over time? And so let's say for our case study, we have a potential target market of 2,000 customers, an available budget for 1 million, and we have a product which is priced at 1,000. So you can choose your currency, it could be dollars or euros, etc. Now, when we take a look at the campaigns, we have two different types of ads that we now can work with. One is the regular pay-per-click ad, and the other one would be the remarketing ad. And in our scenario, I have, let's say, chosen some values here. So the cost per click for the regular campaign is a little bit higher with $2, for example, and remarketing would be $1.50. And the click-through rate is a little bit, it's actually the same for both, but there's a difference in conversion, which is pretty much true for most of the remarketing campaigns that we see now. So let's see what would happen now and what could we do. So of course we can play with the retention days. As I mentioned before, we can change the retention period. Keep in mind that remarketing and setting retention flags also has an implication on your privacy policy. So make sure you have that figured out before you start your campaign. Now, and let's say we would plan for spending about $10,000 per day, and we allocate the budget 80-20, meaning 80% on a day-by-day basis we are spending on regular ads and 20% on remarketing. So what would happen in a scenario like this? Well, first of all, we start spending. So once we have allocated the budget of 1 million, we start spending, and it takes us about 100 days until we have depleted the budget. And since we are allocating here 80-20, we have at the end of the time period, we have allocated or spent 200K worth of remarketing, and we have spent 800K worth on the regular ads. So that's not so exciting, but of course we have some conversion going on, which means that our addressable audience is going down over time, so we are winning customers. And then when we take a look at the customer acquisition, something interesting can be seen. So first of all, we are winning a certain amount of customers, so this is here on this scale. But also when the budget is depleted, there is still a fairly large portion of the market still available. So I don't know, maybe some 600 or something like that, or 1600. So the question is, what can we do now? The basic performance of this campaign setting basically brought us about 795 customers, or as I said before, there are 1200 customers still available, but it also produced a loss. So that's pretty unfortunate. We really don't like that. So the question is, what can we do? That brings us to the topic of optimization now. So here the goal that we are optimizing for is, let's say, for a higher market share. So we want to capture more market share, we want to win more customers, and we want to do it at a profit. So that is our goal. When we're talking about optimization, it's always important to first ask the question, what are you optimizing for? For example, you could choose different optimization goals. You could say, I'm interested in capturing market share as fast as possible because it's an interesting market. I want win these customers first because their lifetime value is very high, very attractive. And so there could be different objectives. Today we are choosing these two objectives, and a little technicality here. It's a very interesting problem to solve because we have a multi-objective optimization. So it's not something that you could do fairly easy on top of your head or even on a spreadsheet. So what happens in this scenario is fairly interesting. Well, first of all, we still have our available budget, but we seem to spend it at a higher rate because we're depleting it much faster. And also, the optimization gives us some indication that we should spend more on the remarketing side and less on the regular ads. So that's an interesting thing. So what happens then with our retention period, the optimization suggests that we should extend it much longer to about 180 days. And this gives us enough room. And since we're spending higher on remarketing, we are depleting our addressable remarketing list much faster. So you can see how this is going down, and eventually it's fading out as we have less and less customers to work with. So we see some what the economists call diminishing returns. And in other words, what happened here is we're able to win a larger number of customers much faster. So here our peak is coming much earlier, and we are winning almost the entire market here with this budget. So as we have been spending a lot more on marketing in a shorter period of time, actually we spent the same amount, so we still have 1 million budget available. We spend it faster, and we are growing more and more revenue. The chances are that we should produce a profit here. So the decisions that we have for this optimization run were to set the retention period from 30 to 180 days. We're spending about 16,000 per day, and we are allocating a much higher portion on remarketing. And that gives us a very positive result. So it's we're winning almost the entire market. So there are only a couple of customers left. And we're producing a very positive margin contribution. So if we add up all the profits that we generate during the campaign run here. In other words, with optimization and with an optimized remix, we have a much improved impact on sales and campaign profit. So we turned around this project from a loss maker into a profitable campaign, and we increased the number of customers that we have captured in the market. Again, this is especially important when you talk about a product or a service where you have an ongoing revenue stream. For example, a software as a service product or platform. So that's why it's really important to optimize the mix. Now, in summary, we've seen that with the optimized remarketing mix, we can win more customers faster with a higher profit. Now, in order to get started on this topic, there's a set of tools and templates and simulations available that I make available in the briefing center. But before I go there, let's draw a conclusion. So first of all, I would encourage you to try remarketing. I think it's a great way to boost the marketing campaign results and optimize the return on your marketing spend. You may want to try it in small controlled experiments until you really confident that this is something that is worthwhile in your particular setting. And also pay attention to the campaign performance KPIs, those that I have demonstrated here in the example case, the CPC, the customer acquisition cost, etc. Secondly, make sure that you review your audience list once in a while. Let's say not every day probably, but every week or every month you should do that, and nurture your list. In other words, make sure that customers are coming back to your website, so then you can keep a profitable list or a list that you can monetize for a longer period of time. And then number three, optimize the campaign. So make sure that you understand the key parameters, and if let's say you don't have the capabilities to optimize the campaign yourself, you can at least try different settings and controlled experiments to see which one of these settings works very well in your particular situation. You can find this briefing and much more in the briefing center. So here's the URL. It's academy.wittigonia.com. Look for the idea cast, and there you can find a set of templates, group coaching, and so on. And if you like the episode, I would be happy to welcome you back again to future episodes, and would be very happy if you could leave a comment or question in the usual social media or here in YouTube on the comments field. Follow us on the social media. You can usually find us on under the hashtag Wittigonia or at Wittigonia, and myself TH Wittig. So with that said, I wish you all the best and good luck, and let me know which one of these tactics are applying to your situation, where you have other questions, and which tactics and strategies you're trying out. All the best and good luck.